I want to talk to you this morning a little bit about sediment. This is the pond here at Rougher Ranch, and most of you know, if you've watched earlier videos, that we created this pond to keep from really flooding out the neighbor's barn and driveway, but also to retain some water so that we could recharge the aquifer. The whole idea was to kind of hold it for a bit and then allow it to slowly go out. And so what we did was we just kind of took this natural little inlet here and just expanded it a bit so that it would slow down the whole process. What we found is that when the rains would come, oftentimes they would come really fast and hard, and it would bring all that topsoil from the hills behind us right into the pond, and it would create a sediment layer, and there would be almost no percolation. It would be, at that point, just evaporation. And so trying to mitigate that and to create a situation to where we could slow it down even more, we are beginning to change the inlet to where we have a sediment pond that it comes into. Then it comes over to a secondary sediment pond, and then it comes back down into the main percolation area. Now, the outlet is also on the uphill side on that back side. And so the intention is that this just becomes an area to where we can hold it for a bit, slow the whole thing down, and keep the sediment out of the pond. Because without that sediment, now we get the percolation that we need, and you know that water brings life, and without that water, we don't survive, the horses don't survive, the goats don't survive, the dogs don't survive, and none of the vegetation will survive. When we look at our devotional this morning, we find that there's a very similar principle here. And if you really take a look at what is being said in Deuteronomy, God is really saying this as well, is that there are certain things that if you don't divert them, they are just going to flow right into your life. So sin is one of those things that will come in and it will flow into your life, and just like this sediment, it will seal over your heart, and the goodness of God won't be able to penetrate into that because you'll end up with a hard heart, or a heart that's sealed over. And so there are things that need to be diverted out of our lives. There are things that need to be pushed away so that we can allow just the goodness of God right there in that area. And so this area here is really for that more crystal clear water, that it might just penetrate and percolate into the soil and really recharge and be a source of life. And that's really what our devotional is about this morning. Interesting is when I think about this, and I think, I wish I had the opportunity to go back and talk to the younger me. I find that a lot of my heart's desires when I was young was either to mirror what I saw in my father or to follow what my mentors were telling me. And one of the things that was really pushed was you need to work hard. You need to be busy. Get after it. And so I would work day and night. Now I look back and there's a lot of things that I worked on that really have no either now earthly value because I've sold it and I moved on, or eternal value. And so a lot of the things that I spent just countless hours on weren't that great. And I found that it did not bring me any fulfillment whatsoever. It didn't bring any personal growth. And I looked around and I saw that other people weren't doing this. And to be honest with you, it kind of made me a bit angry. And that caused me to be somewhat harsh. And then it created a situation where I was much more isolated. And so instead of really valuing the friends that God had kind of put in my life, I really valued chasing things. And that did not work out well. I think the other thing was there was this kind of underlying anxiety that was pushing me, that I needed to perform, that I needed to do this, that I had to do this at certain ages, that I needed to kind of get moving along a little faster. And there was just this push. And I found that caused me not to really trust in God. That caused me to put all of my emphasis on me. And once again, I ended up allowing a lot of really negative things to pour into my life. And I wasn't learning how to filter out those sediments of life. There's another thing that we have a tendency to do, in it, whether we acknowledge it or not, is that we have a tendency to fear man more than God. And that displaced fear creates a lot of problems in your life. And I know that today there is this thing that I was told, it's called FOMO, and it's the fear of missing out. And so you have a tendency to do everything hoping that something would bring fulfillment. It's also been told to me that the term no regrets means something very different than it meant when I was young. To me, no regrets meant that you never wanted to regret what you did, so you worked as hard as you possibly could so that you had no regrets. Now it's this idea of kind of YOLO, you only live once, and it's more about self-fulfillment and partying and things like that. I think that this is going to be something that someone is really going to regret, because they're going to see that it's a very, very selfish kind of life, and all of that sediment now becomes a part of who you are. You become very damaged, you become very hardened, you become isolated. It's not a good thing. There is a lesson that I learned, and I thought it was just absolutely wonderful. It's when I stumbled upon 1 Peter 4:8. It said, "For love covers a multitude of sin." And it was in that passage that I realized, man, God really loves me. And because of his great love, he shed his blood for me. And that blood is a sacrifice of him giving everything he could. And it covered me. Motivated by love. And the more I focused on him, the more I began to adore him, the more I began to think on him, the more I let him flow into my life, enrich my life, penetrate my life, the more life flowed out of me. And the more love was afforded to those around me. And that was just absolutely amazing. So now, I can pour that love and that life into my children. I can allow that to flow into them, because it's so easy to get your kids involved in worldly things. And we can list all those, but you know them. And yes, they do bring fulfillment for a time. But I guarantee that it will ultimately be sediment in the bottom of a pond that will spill over a heart where they won't hear the things of God. And if you think that later on they're going to pick up on this stuff, it's statistically not so. The best time to teach them is when you have them, early on, and then continue to teach them. Continue to create inlets that flow in without all that settlement. Keep them pure. Work on virtue. Very important. To your friends around you, the same thing. Really pour into them the love. Pour into them the Lord. Pour into them life. Our community desperately needs this. You can see every area of our life. This can be vitally important. So, I want to encourage you. It's a time to clean out your pond. But it's also a time to really evaluate what flows into your pond. And the time to do that is not when it's raining and not when it's storming. It's now. Take that time, evaluate that. May God richly bless you. We'll see you tomorrow. Love you. God bless.